So our next artist is Botticelli. And Botticelli, some of the things that we want to note about him in the background information was that he used oil painting on canvas as his medium. Oil painting on canvas. So he was going to create pieces not using the fresco technique, but rather on, portable canvas to be moved around. Now, one of the things we want to note about Botticelli is that he was someone that frequently used the naturalism theme, which we talked about before in our vocabulary as a technique that highlighted and focused on the natural environment, natural world. So he is going to employ that naturalism technique. The third thing that we want to note about Botticelli is that his subject matter were stories from Roman/Greek mythology. His subject matter was stories from Roman/Greek mythology, which is the other common subject matter of the Renaissance. So the first common one we talked about were stories from the Bible, and then by contrast, the other one were stories from Roman or Greek mythology. And then the last thing we want to note about Botticelli in the background information is that the Medicis, Medici, they were patrons of his work. So they were sponsoring him to create the art that he did. So now let's look at one of his pieces. So his most famous piece is called The Birth of Venus. So one of the things we want to note about this particular piece is that this uses that style of naturalism. If we're looking, we can see how Botticelli was trying to capture the trees, the ocean, the flowers, all of those different types of things. He was paying careful detail and attention to. And what this piece is showing is the story of the goddess Venus, also commonly known as Aphrodite, the love goddess. She is being born, and what's interesting about this story from Roman mythology is that Venus was born as a full-grown woman. So she was actually never a baby or an infant or a child or anything like that. But when she was born as a full-grown woman, and that she was born of a seashell from the ocean. And so this particular piece is showing that story. And then after her birth, you can see she is being swept to the shore by the winds. The winds were called zephyrs, Zephyr. And so they are the figure that is pictured there on the left, the male and female kind of intertwined, and they are pushing her ashore. And then we can see that there is a young woman waiting to dress her, and that she's holding this kind of cloth to basically cover her up as she reaches the shore. Now, one of the other things that was very common in a lot of pieces from the Italian Renaissance was the use of nudity. And that was something that we start to see kind of become more popular and used more frequently in this time period. Now, many of the early pieces that are going to use nudity are still going to kind of keep those pieces more modest, whereas the Italian Renaissance progresses, the nudity becomes kind of more to the forefront and not kind of covering up, where you can kind of see Venus is covering herself a little bit more, where later we're going to see that start to kind of dissipate, and that it's going to be a lot more kind of apparent in pieces that the idea and concept of nudity is something that the artists are becoming more comfortable using. So that is this piece, The Birth of Venus, showing the love goddess Venus born as a full-grown woman. and she's born from a seashell in the ocean and then swept to shore by the zephyrs or the winds, and there is a young woman waiting to dress her. So now let's look at our next artist, which is Leonardo da Vinci.